You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It's Friday, the 3rd of November, 2023, and this is episode 37 of The Observing Eye, coming at you live from the computer hell cabin. As always, I like to begin these episodes with a brief moment of reflection, so let's take a moment to contemplate the good things that have happened this week. And now a moment for the not so good. I just want to begin this episode, before we get into the meat of the subject, I want to begin this episode by saying a huge thank you to everybody who has listened so far, because looking at the wonderful metrics of this podcast, we have had 606 downloads since the 6th of January when this podcast came out this year. That is incroyable. Incroyable. So thank you very much, everybody who has listened. And it's made a big difference to the numbers, and it's really nice to see, and it's very motivating for me to see that people are listening, and there is some merit and some worth in it. So I shall keep going. We shall get those numbers up, and hopefully more people can tune in and find some use of it. So let's get into it today, shall we? This episode, as you may have noticed on some of the social stuff that we've been putting up the past week, is called Hedonism, the Enemy of Happiness. So let's begin for a moment just to talk about what hedonism. Should we start again? Let's take a moment to talk about what hedonism is. There's always one little moment, and you'll get this where I have a right slip up on a word. So hedonism then. So sometimes we call it hedonic adaptation. Okay. Sometimes you might have heard of it called the hedonic treadmill. It's essentially this idea that our level of happiness, irrespective of what goes on in our lives, there's little peaks and troughs of life's occurrences, that our happiness has a baseline. And it will always default back to that baseline after a set amount of time. Okay? So let's use an example for a minute, right? So let's say you're at work, you've got this big promotion at work, and you've got a subsequent massive pay rise that comes with it. So you're going to initially feel this big surge of excitement. You're going to feel all of these like mad, exciting ideas of possibilities and things you can do with your newfound wealth and status. You're going to think about all of the extra respect you're going to get from your colleagues, and, potentially the bigger office with the sea view and the personal coffee machine and all that kind of nonsense. Give it a week or two, and all of that stuff that's happened to you, the hefty pay rise, the new office, the newfound respect, the wonderful things you can do, they become your baseline. So the satisfaction that you've derived from the promotion begins to diminish, and you are back feeling just as you were before you got your promotion in the first place. And the dangerous thing about this, and this is why we call it the hedonic treadmill, is that now you've got your promotion and your hefty pay rise, you're immediately looking on the horizon for the next thing to come along that's going to give you that little lift, that little uptick in happiness and, self-worth, all the other stuff we attach to it. So hedonic adaptation doesn't just work on the positive experiences in our life, it also works with negative stuff. It's what can give us our resilience. It's what enables human beings to work through difficult, challenging, and sometimes traumatic experiences, is that they become, sadly, our baseline, and we're able to work through them in a very stoic and consistent way. So hedonic adaptation isn't a bad thing. It is a useful function for psychological health. The issue with hedonic adaptation is the way that it plays into the reward culture that we tend to exist in at the moment. There are questions, cultural questions, that I want to raise to you around consumerism, ambition, and the pursuit of happiness. So let's think about those for a second. I call this podcast Hedonism, the Enemy of Happiness. And the reason I say that is because I feel that the relentless pursuit of happiness can paradoxically cause the opposite of happiness. And this is where our culture plays into our hedonic adaptation in a very negative sense. So when we look at happiness through this hedonistic lens, we see each pleasure, each reward as a fleeting thing. And we are fundamentally left, after every reward, every moment of happiness, we are fundamentally left with this deep sense of what next. This in turn becomes a cycle where, rather than us being grateful for the things that we receive, for the good things that happen to us in our lives, we get stuck in this restlessness, this kind of malfeasance around what is coming around the corner. What more can we have? It leads to like a hunger for happiness. And that hunger, that restlessness, invariably doesn't make us happy. And the further danger of this hedonistic mindset is that hedonism often requires us to compare our current state of existence, our current state of happiness and wealth and everything else, to potential future states. And when we look forward to these potential future states, we're thinking, well, maybe they're going to be more fun than we're having now, which diminishes the experience we're having in the present. And then we attempt to drag the potential future pleasure into the now in a horribly comparative way, which just leaves us with this idea of everything is only always ever slightly out of reach. We are just stuck in this perpetual state of mild dissatisfaction, and we're just clamoring, grasping at the next moment of happiness and pleasure, like Gollum chasing the fucking ring of power. Hedonism tends to leave us in a fairly shallow state as well. We can see, we only have to look at Gollum, poor Gollum, whose entire life and meaning has become the pursuit of the one ring. And that's kind of where we end up if we fall into the trap of hedonism. We lead a life where there is a lack of emotional depth, where our relationships have no real value, and we don't really care or work on personal growth because we just working on a life filled with fleetingly pleasant experiences that are fundamentally devoid of any wealth that comes from when we face our challenges, when we get uncomfortable, when we move into that state of discomfort, which is, as you all know, if you've been following along for a few episodes, you all know that being in a state of discomfort, getting out of your comfort zone, is where all personal growth takes place. Let's take a minute now then to think about, or just to consider, the role that Western society has on promoting hedonism. Now, I think there are a few factors in our culture that are enabling of a hedonistic mindset. The first is that we are very consumer-centric. So our entire economic marketplace thrives on the idea or the creation and fulfillment of desire. And if we know anything about desire, and we know anything about Buddhism, we know that desire is the root of all suffering. From that consumer culture, we obviously, a spin-off of this, or a facet of that, is advertising. And advertising is an intensely powerful force that drives us to want to consume, and that fuels those desires, the things that we wish we should have, the hedonistic looking on the horizon for the next thing. Marketeers are intensely skilled at creating products that are associated with happiness and success. So we end up in this cycle of desire and consumption where the acquisition of products, of things, is equated with the achievement of pleasure and the fulfillment of desire. Alongside that consumer culture, we obviously have the massive media influence. So social media platforms, TV, films, they will often glorify lifestyles that are filled with luxury and excitement and the sensual pleasures. And this helps to perpetuate the idea that happiness is found in material wealth, that it's found in status, that it's found in beauty. And we are frequently shown these hedonistic lifestyles as an aspirational norm, essentially. And I'm going to have to apologize for my cat there because she does like to sing whilst I'm doing podcasts. Let's think about economic systems for a second then. So let's look at capitalism. We all have a bit of capitalism, don't we? Particularly in its more unrestrained form. So capitalism is really great at encouraging hedonism because, again, it equates success with wealth. It equates success with accumulation, with consumption. So personal worth and achievement becomes tied to our ability to indulge in and display economic power through consumption. And then we have the fundamental cultural values of Western society, where we prize individualism. And this is something I've talked about before around meritocracy and the difference between like classic and modern societies. So when we prize individualism, we can interpret this as prioritizing our own pleasure. So while obviously there's a lot of strength in certain aspects of individualism, which it can include things like personal freedom, can include things like fostering innovation. Individualism can lead to a focus on personal enjoyment at the expense of communal well-being or long-term personal growth. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that sense. I guess the question now then is, how do we combat hedonism? What can we do to push back against the treadmill and all of the various influences that are going to be pushing against us, that are going to make us want to be hedonistic? One simple solution: gratitude. So the relationship between hedonism and gratitude is mildly paradoxical in the sense that hedonism is obviously, as we've talked about, is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. So we're all about maximizing personal enjoyment and satisfaction when we talk about hedonism. With gratitude, it's all about the acknowledgement and appreciation of what we have in the present, irrespective of our desires for more, irrespective of our desires for wanting better. So gratitude's a focus on our present situation and, being mindful and aware of the good things around it, rather than this incessant pursuit of potential future pleasure or fulfillment of desire. When we employ gratitude to our lives, when we take gratitude in the context of our current situation, of our present moment, it can be a powerful antidote to hedonic adaptation. So when we practice gratitude, we become much more attuned to the value and the richness of what's going on for us in the present, instead of always looking on that horizon, trying to find the next peak of accomplishment or pleasure. So when we are mindful with gratitude, we shift our focus away from the hedonic treadmill, which is where, we have short-lived bursts of satisfaction and we return to the baseline. So we move ourselves into this state of appreciation. We enable ourselves to become content with what we have in the present moment. It also enables us to become appreciative of what you might want to call the simple things. So when we adopt this hedonistic lifestyle, we can overlook the little things, the little joys in life, because we are just relentlessly searching for these high-intensity pleasures that fire over the horizon. In essence, then, hedonism is about seeking more, and gratitude is about being content with and finding depth in what's already present. So whilst hedonism seeks to raise the bar for pleasure, to continuously raise the bar for pleasure, which will invariably lead to us feeling perpetually dissatisfied, gratitude lowers that bar for what constitutes pleasure, because we're being present with things in the moment, and it allows for a much more consistent experience of happiness. So by fostering gratitude, we can essentially change our hedonic set point, which is raising our baseline for happiness. It doesn't mean that we're going to stop seeking out new things. It doesn't mean that we're going to stop seeking pleasure or not having desires. But it does help us to be more resilient by looking at the diminishing returns of new pleasures and allows us to be more appreciative of the current state of affairs, which in turn gives us a deeper and more sustained happiness. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say on hedonism as the enemy to happiness. As always, thank you for spending your time with me today. It's always appreciated, and I hope that you've come away from this with a little bit of insight and a little bit of knowledge that you didn't have before. I'm always keen to hear what all of my listeners have to say in their comments around any of the subjects I talk about. So if you'd like to add your voice to the conversation, then please go and have a look on our Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com. Leave a comment directly on the podcast, or you can contact me on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, all with the handle The Observing Eye. And that's the letter I, not the eye through which you see. Wishing you all a fabulous weekend. Go out there, get off that hedonic treadmill, inject some gratitude. Treadmill. Get off that hedonic treadmill, inject some gratitude into your life and be present in the moment. Much love, everybody, and I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope that you found it useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writings or work around psychology and philosophy and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com, and that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll see you soon.